Good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. Welcome to the second episode of the Voices of Sustainability virtual fireside chat series. Today, we're going to be talking about protecting biodiversity and why it matters. My name is Charlotte Mack-Heller, and I lead the natural resource management practice at Resonance, a global development firm that uses market-based solutions to solve some of the world's toughest challenges. Through this role, I've been fortunate to be able to support Resonance's work with the Zayed Sustainability Prize, providing research and due diligence on prize applications. Working at the nexus of international environmental issues and climate change for years, I'm really excited to be here today to moderate a discussion on biodiversity, environmental conservation, and climate action. Today, I'm joined by David D. Rothschild, the founder of Voice for Nature Foundation. David's commitment to the environment has sent him to some of the world's most remote and fragile regions to bring widespread media coverage and attention, and more importantly, solutions to urgent global environmental issues. His foundation, Voice for Nature, aims to promote positive environmental change towards global sustainability by supporting creative, innovative, and sustainable action. David, welcome to today's Voices of Sustainability virtual fireside chat. Thanks so much for joining us.
Firstly, thank you for organizing this. For all of you at home, it's not a real fire. It's an LED carbon neutral fireside chat that we're having.
David, as an environmentalist, eco-adventurer, and polar explorer, you have witnessed some of the most remote and virgin landscapes of our planet, from the North Pole to the South Pole. How did that experience and what you saw there convert you to become a climate activist?
My background really actually in terms of getting into the environmental space came through the lens of health. I trained as a naturopath and have a degree in natural medicine. And very quickly, I think once you start to realize, you are what you eat and you are what you breathe, you cannot really separate health from your body, from health from the planet. They're so intrinsically linked. But when I was studying my medicine 20 odd years ago, I think the conversation was still quite alternative for the health elements and also for the sustainability side of things. But really running through all of that was this sort of essence of curiosity. And that's something that's remained with me, thankfully. And I think that has always been sort of my biggest motivator, is to kind of challenge the status quo around some of these big issues, to try and create narratives that continue to push and challenge the way we've done things. And I think through that, I found myself putting together these expeditions, installations, whether it's art installations, whether it's creating events, bringing people around this narrative that sort of focuses more on what's possible versus the what's wrong, which is what we see often. I think as environmentalists, we're very good at sort of presenting what's wrong with nature, presenting the demise of nature. I sometimes think that we could kind of rename ourselves as undertakers for the wilderness. We sort of print all these statistics on what's being lost versus what's possible. And so I think my focus has primarily been on trying to make or connect the dots on what's possible, and try and create stories that inspire people to not just focus on what we might lose and are losing, but focus on what we can save and what we can preserve and enrich as well. So I think it's been a real balance, a real roller coaster. But I think the two worlds of health and health of environment have always been really, really close to my heart. Because I think if you really look at it and you really break it down, you start to realize that, there is no separation between us and nature. We are nature and nature is us. So when you start to make these slightly deeper connections, you start to realize that we cannot survive on this planet unless we reintegrate into the web of life and recognize ourselves as part of that system. And that's the sort of challenge that I enjoy setting myself and my organization to try and elevate and talk about.
Yeah, I think the interconnectedness that you mentioned is a really important part of the work that we do. And it brings me to the next question, which is, we know that biodiversity is at the heart of human well-being and that it really underpins all activities, from the provision of food and water to supporting human health, climate resilience, and even providing jobs. Yet the ways in which we have structured our modern supply chains, from how we eat to how we shop, they really seem to be prioritizing profit making at the expense of biodiversity. So I'm curious, do you think that we're working against nature? And if so, why?
I definitely think we are sadly working against nature. We work with nature, but we don't want to spend the time to understand nature. And I think you have to go back maybe 10,000 years to the first agricultural revolution, when we looked at the soil, and we looked at the plants and what was provided and what could be provided on a natural rhythm. So we have to start thinking about, how do we think outside of the box? How do we think in those non-linear ways, but in those system integrated circular economy ways, where we look at how nature creates everything but creates no waste. So it can provide everything it needs, but there is no such thing as waste. There's nutrition, and then there's the sustenance that comes from the end of the life cycle that creates the growth for the next wave. So we do things in a very linear way. We do things in a way that is really sort of, for the most part, I think, grounded in this word disposability, right? So we got to a certain threshold in terms of how we made. And then we realized that those things, if they lasted forever, or if someone only bought one of them, then we couldn't sustain the kind of growth that we perceive to be successful. And to me, that growth and that perceived success overtook the concept of improving. And so if a company or an organization creates something that maybe just is steady, but is improving the lives of people, improving the health of nature, improving its role in the community, if it doesn't outperform and outperform and outperform, we say it's not good enough. We say it's not working the right way, and we must get more from it. And that then is where we start to work against nature, because there isn't such thing as this perpetual growth and growth and growth. There's cycles of change, cycles of nutrients, cycles of the seasons, cycles of the ebbs and flow of tides, or cycles of the rhythm of what happens with the jungles as they break down during the certain time of year and then create sustenance for the next cycle. And so we seem to have this growth curve that has to perpetually go up. We're chasing this infinite growth versus improvement. And so all of these elements, these trade routes we created, this organization that we created almost in isolation, outside of sort of thinking that we're involved in nature. We looked at it as this endless horizon, this infinite resource base, and that we could be superior. And so we could manipulate nature, we could produce more than we needed, and then we could export that around the world at prices and high prices. And then we created trade deals to perpetuate those things. And when you really look at a lot of the stuff that we do, it creates so much waste and so much unnecessary damage to natural systems. And so, we'll be catching fish on one side of the world and then flying them to the other side of the world, just to maybe, peel them and cut them, and then we'll fly them back again to sell them in the same place that they were caught. All because of an agreement that was made maybe when we didn't have a concept or understanding of the impact of those miles for the food, or the fact that those fish can't sustain that kind of assault, So I think we have to start recognizing that there are systems that have been around for 4.5 billion years. I mean, it still blows my mind that we can live on this planet. We have all the understanding of why. We have all the tools on how we can stop that collapse, but somehow there's a disconnect. It's a big question that we'll have to ask ourselves. What is the disconnect? That we are driving ourselves towards extinction at a rate that's faster than ever, and we're taking all the other species with us. And it's, when I really get down to it, a big part of it, I think, comes down to that sometimes we're just incapable of learning, to let go of the habits. We just have to, we put so much emphasis on learning, but at some point we have to unlearn to relearn a new way. We can't keep using the same models and methodologies to get us out of the problems that we find ourselves in today. We have to find new methods, new methodologies, and have a new mindset. So, I do think we continue to work against nature because we created these systems that made us feel superior and outside of the web. And if we could stop and listen and learn, then we could start to reintegrate. Then we could have that humility, you know, that we need, you know. That's where I think I spend most of my time thinking about is how do we get back into our inner explorer, back into our childlike state of curiosity when we're not overwhelmed by ego or status or overwhelmed by things that maybe drive us away from taking the right choices. You know, maybe, you know, we have to think in a more sort of what I call expanded self-interested way versus just self-interested, which is a real challenge because, you know, if you go back from an evolutionary standpoint, we are still hunter-gatherers. You know, we don't maybe hunt and gather, and we don't use maybe, you know, we don't just gather maybe sticks and stones anymore. We gather stocks and likes and, you know, and things that, you know, maybe don't serve us, but yet it's in our DNA. So maybe that's part of the problem. We're living with a slightly outdated brain to deal with the problems that we face today. So that might be that might be one of the bigger challenges, is the psychology of the human mind and how to unpick it, and you know, turn you know, progress into improving, or, you know, be more afraid of losing the, you know, the oceans than swimming in it. Because right now we're more afraid of swimming in the ocean, being eaten by a shark, than we are losing the species. We're more afraid of camping in the woods at night than we are losing the entire woods. So something's amiss in all of this, you know? So I
Yeah,
think
it's a
these are
really
things.
interesting way to think about it. You know, you're bringing up a lot of really interesting points. And I think kind of at the foundation of it, it's behavior change, but not behavior change in like our day-to-day activities. It's like
Yeah.
really innate within humans and how we are going to react to the future. It's very interesting. And kind of along those lines, you know, I had read about you crossing the Pacific Ocean on a catamaran made out of 12,500 reclaimed plastic bottles. And tell me, what did that expedition teach you? And what were you hoping to teach the world?
So the project you mentioned was called Plasticy, and it started in 2006. And it was driven by this desire to kind of, if I go back one step, I had just got off an expedition in the North Pole, and I'd spent about 110 days trying to cross from Russia to Canada through the North Pole with 16 dogs. And I remember getting back, and after 2 weeks of being back and sleeping in a bed and having a warm shower and overeating, you know, having time friends and family, so how was it, you know? And every time you describe it, you realize that you're describing it in a way that feels very abstract. You know, I was almost going, wow, that was me. And I'm thinking, if I've spent that much time there and I'm trying to explain South-side out of my environment, I'm trying to explain melting ice, I'm trying to explain, you know, that this North Pole is disappearing, and I find it hard, how can other people who haven't been there to have the luxury that I had and the privilege I had to go and feel it and understand it and try and then tell that story? How could I pick something that could maybe be more prevalent in everyday life? And so the thing that I noticed was plastic and trash, and the amount of plastic that we all use, these human fingerprints that we see everywhere now littered across our oceans, which have become a much bigger narrative than they were in 2006. So after coming back from the North Pole, thinking about my next expedition, I wanted something that people could really relate to on a daily basis and could take a very simple step and say, okay, well, if I'm buying this and it's covered in plastic, if I was to remove that, then I could lessen my footprint and I could actually see a really clear pathway between problem and solution. And so I started thinking about how we can make that interesting and how we can make it dynamic. And looking back now, it was driven by really this sort of this inspiration from the Kon-Tiki, which was an amazing expedition in the 40s by Thor Hardell and his merry men, who built this balsa wood raft and sailed across the Pacific just using the wind and the currents, from Peru all the way into Rangiora in the South Pacific. And you know, for me, when I sort of thought about that story and thought about what we were seeing in our ocean, these plastic fingerprints, these big garbage patches, I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to build a boat made entirely of plastic bottles to kind of elevate this narrative and really turn it into a design story? Because again, waste is a design conversation. You know, it's a disposability conversation. It's a mindset again. You know, convenience is something that was really pushed heavily and still is in terms of our consumption habits. You know, like use it once and throw it. You know, and that works for a number of reasons. It works if you want to produce a lot of stuff, and you need to produce a lot of stuff to get back to that growth curve. Then yeah, disposability is your friend. But disposability is the enemy of the environment, because there is no such place as a way. And when we use really smart materials, monster hybrid materials, which we do in everyday construction of everyday household items, those things are designed to last forever, or at least the material is. So what we did was we built this catamaran with the idea of just sort of illuminating this story, getting people to really pay attention to the plastics conversation. And this was back in 2010 when we set sail from Sydney, and we sailed 12,500 miles or kilometers, I should say, down to Sydney from San Francisco. And it was an incredible journey, because it was one that was grounded in this sort of very visual message. And we were the message on the bottle, which was, you know, that plastic is the problem. But only if it's coupled with the fact that we've used it the wrong way, right? And we've misunderstood it. We have this toxic love affair, because plastic used correctly, you know, in devices that aren't disposable and only used once, it's actually a really smart material, and it can be reused, and it's light, and it's easily, you know, reclaimed. And we have a lot of infrastructure to do that. But what we haven't quite got our heads around is the sort of that disposability narrative. And so there's a lot of things that we use on a daily basis that are made of plastic that get used for a matter of seconds, that use a ton of resources, whether that's water or oil and other chemicals. And then it ends up getting either incinerated in landfill, or tragically ending up, you know, coming through our river systems and into our oceans. So the Plasticy was a sort of a visual feast for people. If you're a sailor and you knew nothing about what we're talking about, you would look at this crazy boat and you'd be like, what are they doing? They're bound to, you know, end up in trouble at some point. And then they'd look at the boat and go, what is that? And we'd be like, yeah, there's 12,500 plastic bottles that we reclaimed from the waste stream in San Francisco to prove that this was a resource that could be reused. And we wanted it to be aesthetically something beautiful that you would look at and actually really realize that there's a life cycle that can go up the supply chain, up the value chain. It doesn't have to go down, which is interesting. Like if you take a material like aluminum, we've got a very sophisticated supply chain. If I take an aluminum can and enough of them, I can melt them down and make a very high valued item. I can make an aluminum alloy for a car wheel. I can make I can do something really structural. When I take plastic, we only think about it going down the supply chain. So a lot of the times when we look at plastic, we think about it as something that goes maybe at best into an old fleece. Maybe it goes into a, you know, a sort of recycled carpet somewhere, or, you know, someone's really excited they got a pen. They say, hey, my pen's made of recycled plastic, you know, which is great, but they're never perceived as value up. It always seems to be going value down. And so at some point, that recycled pen or that great fleece that you got from a conference, or another reusable mug that you get made of plastic, recycled plastic, gets thrown out and goes back into landfill or goes back down the waste stream and is perceived as valueless. So our biggest message was to try and reimagine the material as something highly valuable. You know, I remember sort of saying this once, you know, there was a great marketing campaign in the 30s by De Beers, which was a mining company in South Africa, who controlled, and still to this day control, the sort of value perception of diamonds, a very commonly found material. But the way the story was told was it became the sort of the engagement ring. And then the engagement ring became a symbol of eternity, because diamonds last forever. And the control of that market created a narrative that said diamonds are absolutely priceless and will pay anything for the best diamonds. And then we give them a grading and a color and a thing. The same for plastic. I know it's not as romantic, and I'm sure there's a lot of women out there saying, this is where I check out of the, you know, and men, and say I'm, you know, checking out of the conversation. But, you know, plastic lasts forever, you know, but we make it valueless, because the machine that pumps out all that material only works if it's pumping out a lot of material. It doesn't work if it's held on to. So we design for disposability. These are things that we're doing. And so that is one of the things that we have to, you know, recognize, you know, in terms of the sort of the story. So it was a story, and if we can reimagine these stories and we can say, why, when we see a tree in the forest, do we think it's okay just to chop it down? We don't value it. But if we take a tree and we whittle it into a violin, a Stradivarius violin, it's priceless. If we take a cow and we kill it, it's just meat. But so yeah, back to Plasticy, it was a story to try and change the value perception of plastics, to try and get people to reimagine that this material could actually be absolutely priceless and could be redesigned in a way that would engage a new story and a new life. And that's what it did. It started a conversation 10 years ago. 2021, we're still unfortunately having a lot of the same conversations. And this is where the relationship between, private enterprise and governments really intersects. This is where we start to see these two worlds coming together. And we're seeing that now more than ever, not just in the plastic space, but in the environmental space altogether. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, it's true. Storytelling is definitely a powerful tool. And I think that there's a lot of room in the environmental sector to be able to use it to our advantage and really educate people on understanding how important the environment is and all of these natural resources and what they are beyond just being commodities. So I really appreciate the way that you know how to go above and beyond really to tell a story. I think it's pretty inspiring. So another question for you, ecosystem-based approaches should be an integral part of global adaptation and mitigation efforts. What are your recommendations for building and maintaining healthy ecosystems that are more resilient to climate change and therefore more able to safeguard our prosperity and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've nailed it. I mean, this is an area that just has to be embraced and looked at. I mean, I think we're sort of, the first thing to think about is that we're running against the clock, or running down the clock very quickly. So we can either go out and imagine a new world and imagine new systems that don't exist and try and create those new systems. And that's a path that we'll keep on going down. And that's a path that we have gone down. And that's sort of creative evolution of humanity, But then there's the bedrock of this planet. There's 4.5 billion years of nature systems and ecosystems and resilience that's built into these incredibly complex and beautiful elements that keep us alive, that provide us with food, that provide us with shelter, that provide us with water, that not just provide us, but provide all the other species. And that for me is an area where you don't have to reimagine. You just have to stop, listen, understand, and then start to realize that the very thing that we do often is rush in and stamp and tramp and cut and burn and exploit something that is peacefully and majestically been working like that for millions, if not billions of years. And those ecosystems can provide us with all the things we need. Just take regenerative farming. It's a classic example, right? We could get all of the carbon out of the atmosphere that we need just by using our fields correctly, without even adding any more, just taking the land that we have, a fraction of it, and actually not just manipulating it and monocropping it and destroying it with artificial fertilizers and fossil fuel-based fertilizers and completely strip mining all the microbes and all the healthy organisms that keep that soil producing, taking all of that stuff out just for the sake of profit and agribusiness. But we could regenerate that soil with healthy microbes. We can absorb way more carbon, right? And we can turn these fields that are dead, that we leave fallow, and turn them into carbon sinks. You look at our ocean and you look at what it provides us every second breath. And so when we start to think about that, and we start to think about the phytoplankton that is, basically responsible, the microorganisms that basically produce this oxygen from the ocean, and that phytoplankton's relationship to the whales, and how the whales are involved in that. And then we keep on thinking about our exploitation of those whales. And again, we look at the system And we say, well, if we get rid of the whales and we start losing even more phytoplankton, if we start heating the oceans even more, we start more phytoplankton, all of a sudden you start doing the maths and you say, well, wait. So our oxygen generating centers, trees, ocean, both of which are in decline. And then the other thing that we do is that we burn more stuff in our atmosphere and put more toxins in our atmosphere, that we need those engines to clean and filter, those natural systems that filter. And they can filter, but they just can't keep up with the pace at which we are pushing out those toxins. So if we can let the planet breathe, if we can, there's a great author and friend and colleague, and Paul Hawken, who wrote Drawdown, which is a fascinating book, and set of principles that is exactly this, is looking at how you think about the planet. It's breathing, it's breathing in and it's breathing out. When you have, your summer and your trees are full, and they're sucking in all of that extra carbon, there's an amount they can suck in. It's like taking a huge breath. And what we need to do is allow that breath to absorb all the carbon, not have full capacity and still be outputting lots of carbon, which is what we do because we're producing so much more of those gases. I always say this to people, like sharks, great example, right? So they're hundreds of millions, 300-400 million years old, 250-400 million years old. They've been roaming around, and we're hell-bent on killing them because they have a PR problem, right? Because we get in the ocean, we're like, oh my God, that thing's going to eat us. So when we hear about them being caught up in fishing nets or for shark fin, we sort of go, whatever, that thing would eat me. When you look at sharks, especially the slow moving sharks, they have a patterning on the surface of their skin, which helps them to swim very much, much more efficiently. But the patterning on their skin is also, they've realized, scientists recently, is also a natural antibacterial patterning. Bacteria doesn't like to grow on that pattern. So now you take that pattern and you apply it to high traffic surfaces like a mobile phone or a door handle. We're living in a world where we're obsessed by viruses and antibacterial sprays and all this stuff now, and wipes. You could literally mimic a shark's skin over surfaces, and it would cut the bacterial, uptake tenfold, 50-fold. And you look at it, there's a couple of companies now that are starting to do that. So now you take something that you think would maybe kill you, although statistically you've got more chance of a coconut landing on your head, or a vending machine falling on you when you're trying to get your bar out because you can't quite reach it and it falls on you. Now you've got the shark that could protect us and provide us with information on how to survive a future outbreak of a bacterial outbreak or a viral outbreak because of the way that its skin has formed over millions of years to protect itself, hundreds of millions of years. So there's that kind of nature-based learning as well that I think is fascinating. And I think if you start to pull all these elements together and recognize that it's not going to be one versus the other, it's going to be many shades all coming together to paint a new picture. That's where we can really find some interesting, I think, opportunities.
That shark example is really, really powerful. I hadn't heard that before, but I think it's also very relevant for our current time, and really reinforces that there's a lot of learning that nature has already done, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but just learning from nature is really important. I guess switching gears, as the world prepares for COP26 in Glasgow this November, I understand you're working with various stakeholders and local communities in the UK to draw attention to the important issue of microplastic pollution in rivers, and really raising awareness around the solutions that are available to reverse the damage of microplastics. Does climate action for you lie in promoting such solutions at a global level?
These convening of parties are really about convening of passion, a convening of purpose, and a convening of priority. So we see people come in the side wings of these events, the activists, the groups who come in from all over the world and use it as a benchmark, as a date to convene and say, look, I'm not waiting for you, I'm doing this, and this is what we're doing, and I'm doing this, and this is what I'm doing, and if you want to join me, join me. And so some of the best interactions I've ever seen and some of the most exciting, dynamic forces come together around COP. I've still seen a lot of posturing at the top. And I know back in Paris, I remember being there and everybody was like, yes, we've solved it, tick, done, let's move on. And we look at where we are today and we're still in the same position. And, so I hold a lot of, sort of hope that this will change, but I also, got to be realistic, which is where, you know, we as an organization, as Voice for Nature, we'll create a campaign, we'll create an action, we'll create something real. The plastics conversation is also a pollution conversation, is also a climate conversation, because 20% of the world's oil is going on the production of plastic. So you can't have a climate conversation and without a plastics conversation. There's some interesting plastics, agreements that are being put into play. There's one which is sort of mirroring the Paris Agreement, called the Plastic Paris Pact, which is looking to do this, and create a sort of global consensus. So for me, the microplastics issue, the plastic issue, is still very prevalent, because it really can connect you as an individual to something that you can see and do. It really makes it very clear. And the microplastics and the river conversation, so for me, it really brings it to the local narrative. I think about the ocean conversation we had, which is out there. It feels like a global conversation. So if you're an individual, you go, well, that's something out there. When we think about what happens if you reverse back, you go from an ocean to an estuary. Well, an estuary makes it a national conversation, and then a river makes it a local conversation. So for me, we're teaming up with some great partners, UN Environment, with Natural History Museum, with a bunch of great scientists. And we're trying to create stories that really connect people, not just to the plastics conversation, but to their habits and to the river systems around them, and recognizing that it's all interconnected. Because the biggest thing that I get is, well, why should I care? How does that connect to me? I'm not throwing plastic in the ocean. I've never been to the ocean, right? I'm not affecting climate change. I'm just me. Meanwhile, those, people sitting on mining Bitcoin, and it's got a huge footprint, and like, I've got nothing to do with changing the climate, it's, I can't remember what it is, the stat now, but it's crazy. It's like, producing as much pollution. And I'm not even going to say what country, because someone will come after me and say, no, you're wrong, but it's a lot, So, and I say that because years ago, actually, in 2007, we actually flooded Second Life, which was a game at the time, which was a pretty big material world, saying that average user in Second Life was using more energy than your average Brazilian was using in real life. And so let's offset in our real life. And so, we are all sucking up a lot of resources every day, myself included. I don't sit on a high horse in any way, shape, or form and say, that I'm better than you. No, we've gone beyond that. If you're fortunate enough to have the space and time and, the luxury to really contemplate these things, and to be able to, make, and also have the opportunity to make a difference, then you need to do everything you possibly can. And when you think that there are, 1 billion people around the world who have no access to clean drinking water, have no access to sanitation, and 2 billion people are fighting for survival just on a daily basis, it's not even like, thinking about this stuff just seems alien, right? Because if I'm just fighting purely just to keep alive, very hard for me to think about, these kind of conversations, even though I'm the one who's probably feeling it the most on the front line of it. And so it's this really horrible irony of it all. And it's sort of something that I think I don't take for granted ever. I think about my privileged position that I'm in.
Yeah, I think your point about environmental justice is a really important one. And we're constantly talking about social justice, and it is incredibly important, but we often forget in the public conversation about environmental justice and just how important it is, and how privileged we are from the US and the UK, how our actions really are affecting so many people across the world, and just the equity issues surrounding that. So I think it's really important point. And I guess kind of building on the point of grassroots action, you've said before that public discourse around natural conservation is often dominated by the fear and the negative headlines, instead of looking at it from more of an inspiring, a sense of wonder and awe for nature. And we've heard you say that here today as well. So as you continue to preach cautious optimism, How do you think that negative discourse has been affecting action at that grassroots level?
I think it's a tough one. I think there's a phrase that I keep on hearing now: eco anxiety. You know, there's a generation of young kids, like my
Mhm.
niece and nephew's age, who are, you know, early teens. They're online, they're mobile, they're looking at information, they're hearing stuff. They've heard about a lot of the narratives that we hear in the media, in class, right? They learn about climate change, they learn about deforestation, they learn about this kind of changing planet, and then they hear a lot about these massive events, you know, because they see the news, and you know, it's another fire, it's another hurricane, it's another flood, it's another disaster, and they feel powerless. And so you get overwhelmed very quickly. And when you get overwhelmed and you can't see a way forward, um, you can check out, and you sometimes say, well, I just don't know how to deal with this. It's too much for me. Someone else will deal with it. So I think there's a real fear in a lot of people, where if you just keep on focusing on the negative, we just keep on hearing what's wrong, after a while you feel, you know, the empathy turns to apathy, you know, like you do feel that you just feel overwhelmed. And so it's important for us to try and find things that we can actually tick off the list, that we can solve, that we can work together on. And there's a lot of low hanging fruit with instead of very complex narratives. And if we can just get some of those like going, that momentum will create momentum, that will drive more activists. And you know, I got a message from a guy who, he saw Plasticy push off from San Francisco when he was 9 years old, and now he's 19, 20, and he was inspired by that. And he wrote me and said, look, I've started an ocean activist app. I'm really excited by, you know, where I've gone with my life, and I saw this expedition, I saw this thing. It was very positive to me because it was sailing, which I loved, and it was about the ocean, which I love, and now I want to be an activist to save the ocean. And so the other side of it is that we've got weapons of mass distribution, right? Look at where the world's gone from a connectivity standpoint in the last year. Like, we can all talk from many sides of the world. We can share ideas. We can, you know, literally pick up a mobile device. We can, you know, put it on the back of a drone, film something, upload that image, get, you know, citizen scientists all around the world to comment on it, or just, you know, help you with deciphering that information, create a community around it, and suddenly protect that area. So we've got the tools now to observe the planet like never before, which is why when people say to me, well, isn't exploration over? Isn't it dead? You know, how can you explore? And I'm like, no, it couldn't be further from the truth.
So I have one more question for you. I'm hoping that you can describe in one word the future of sustainability.
In one word, nature. That would be my word. I think the future of it is we need to strip away a lot of the complex jargon and go back to nature. I've never met anybody who doesn't like or love nature. It's all here, right in front of us. The shiniest, most beautiful object in the world is right underneath our feet, right where we are now. So now is the time to act.
I think that's a fantastic way to tie up today's discussion, David. I want to give you a really big thank you for your incredibly valuable insights and really inspiring message today. Just a reminder to the audience that Voices of Sustainability encourages more submissions to the Zayed Sustainability Prize Awards. The current cycle is open for submissions until May 6, 2021, and will culminate in an award ceremony in January 2022. Please also nominate a pioneer of your choosing by tagging them in an existing or new post, along with the campaign hashtag #FindThePioneer, or by sending an email to the prize team at info@zayedsustainabilityprize.com with information about the pioneer. And thanks again for tuning in. We hope to see you at the next Voices of Sustainability virtual fireside chat.